My name is Jerry Gill. Today is December 5th, 2010. I'm visiting with John Beall and his ranch here south of Moore, north of Norman, and west, somewhere like that. Is that right, John?
That's correct.
And this interview is for the Old State Storage Project and the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. I appreciate you taking time in your busy schedule, John, to visit with us about your memories as a spirit rider and your time at Oklahoma State University. But I want to visit with you first, if we can kind of back up. Could you share with me a little bit about where you grew up, your early life, school, etc.?
I can. When I was a kid, we lived in West Texas. My dad was the vet at a big ranch called the 4 Sixes.
Okay.
And he started doing vet work on a famous horse named Go Man Go here in Oklahoma, and that moved us to Oklahoma.
Okay.
And we moved to Norman, and I lived in Norman from the time I was 10 until I graduated high school in 1981.
Did your dad grow up in Texas?
Yes, my whole family grew up in East Texas, Nacogdoches, Texas. I was born there too.
Okay, great. So you moved to Norman at age 10?
Yes, sir.
And then went to school here. And what about in high school, some of your activities? Did you share kind of community school activities?
I played football and played athletics till about the 8th grade, I think, through the 8th grade. And then I was high school rodeoing, and I got committed enough to high school rodeo that's all I wanted to do. And made the high school rodeo finals every year. All 4 years of my high school.
National?
Made the national finals as a senior, won state as a senior in steer wrestling. Set a state record. They haven't changed yet.
What was it?
Steer wrestling.
But in what time?
3.5.
3.5. Wow. I can see why that did. You got on him fast, didn't you?
That's pretty good for high school rodeo.
That's great. What? Can you tell me about brothers, sisters, your family?
I have a sister. She's a veterinarian. She's a graduate of Oklahoma State Vet School, and she's a veterinarian, lives in North Texas. It's just myself and my sister. And my parents, my dad's practiced veterinary medicine here in Oklahoma he's retired now, but he's only been retired a couple of years. So.
And your sister's name?
Lucette, Dr. Lucette Beall.
Okay, great. So pretty much anything other than rodeo that you recall, growing up that you did? Did you have any part-time jobs, work?
I worked from the time I was 10 years old on. My dad's a big believer in the character building of work, and once I got serious about rodeo, and I was committed to not have a steady job, so I hauled hay for farmers and gathered cattle for people and did anything I could to keep from having a steady job so I could rodeo on the weekends and still have enough money to go.
Well, where did that desire to be a rodeo competitor, where did it come from?
Well, my dad had rodeoed. My dad played college football at Swanee, Tennessee, and then went to Texas A&M and graduated vet school. But he had rodeoed and he had an interest in it, and my sister did. And I started out riding broncs and bulls, and then moved to the timed events.
You did that to steer wrestling then?
Steer wrestling and calf roping and team roping. I did all of those all the way through college.
That's great. What are some, you talked about your dad, believing in work, but were there other values, principles you learned growing up that were important to you later in life?
Really and truly, I'm blessed. My parents have been married 52 years. They were high school sweethearts. Ethics and do the right thing and do what you said you would. And my parents were old school, that you work and you pay your bills, and if you tell somebody you'll do something, you do your best to do it. And if you can't do it, you go take your hat off and admit that you can't and take your medicine. And I mean, when I was pretty small, a buddy of mine and I stole some candy from a store, and my mom figured it out and took us back down to the store and made us go in and tell the manager without her help and sweep the parking lot till he decided we were even with him. I was raised pretty old school.
You rolled at Oklahoma State University, John.
Well, I think I was blessed. I had a rodeo scholarship to Southwestern, and I took it. I at one point didn't think I wanted to go to college. I thought I wanted to rodeo, and I'll never forget, I was walking down the hill to our arena. My dad was riding a young horse. I guess he was leading a young horse, and I was riding a horse and leading a couple. And I mustered up the courage. I always told Dad things first, because Mom kind of ruled the roost at home. If you could get it by Dad, then you had two of you to present it to Mom. And I'll never forget, I said, Dad, I don't think I want to go to college. Boy stopped and looked back at me, and he said, well, you're sure going somewhere, because you're not staying here. And all of a sudden, that rodeo scholarship looked pretty good with dorms and a place to put my horses when I didn't have anywhere to stay. So I went to Southwestern, and I went there a year and a half.
Southwestern there, Weatherford,
Oklahoma. Yes, sir. And they didn't have any ag classes, and I looked around at the guys these were guys that were rodeoing that when I was a freshman, sophomore in high school, I thought a lot of, and they weren't going anywhere. I mean, they just weren't going anywhere. It was rodeo's a tough way to make a living, and these were guys that were going pro and weren't winning and barely getting by, and I just looked around and I was surrounded by people that I liked, and I liked rodeo, but I felt like, golly, this is a dead end street.
So, John, what you were saying is one of the reasons you were thinking about not going to college because you wanted to rodeo professionally.
That's what I wanted to do. Thought I could make a living training horses and rodeo. And I had worked for a trainer several summers, and he had convinced me that I was quite a hand, and all the things they do to get you to come work for them cheap, you know that drill. But I came home. My mom is a solid lady, and always been there when things were tough. And I came home and sat down at the dining room table and said, they don't have anything that interests me where I'm going to school. And Mom said, why don't you go somewhere else? And I said, well, Mom, you know, I'm on a scholarship. And my mom said, son, if you're serious about an education, I'll match your scholarship at any school in the state. And I said,
wow.
Okay, I want to go to Oklahoma State.
Did you know about some of the programs at Oklahoma State?
All I knew was that it was the school to go to if you wanted a degree in agriculture. And I had no idea. I mean, when I was probably 13, my dad and some partners built a horse farm in Oklahoma, a big premier horse farm. And oddly enough, I've never struggled with what I was going to do for a living. I've known since I was 10 years old that I was going to rodeo for a living, and if that didn't work, I was going to be a horse farm manager and a horse trainer. And I've known that since they built that place. So when I began to recognize that rodeo is not the right direction, then to be a horse farm manager, I felt like I needed some business and some animal science and the skills to run a business.
So, John, you graduated from high school in
81.
81. So then in 82, would have been the fall of 82. You come to Oklahoma State after 1 year of college.
Well, let me do a little math while we're talking.
Okay.
I went to Weatherford in the fall of 81.
Okay.
So the spring of 81, and then the spring of 82 and the fall of 82, I transferred mid-season. So I would have gone spring of 83 is when I went.
Spring of 83. Okay.
Yes, sir.
When you got to Oklahoma State.
Yes, sir.
Well, what was your major when you got there? Did you declare a major?
When I got there, I don't remember if I went animal science. I don't remember, but I had only been there a brief time when I became aware that the rodeo charter was in trouble because the rodeo program didn't have an advisor, and you can't have a program without an advisor. And Dr. Finley, word through the grapevine was that he had put together the rodeo program at Vernon, Texas.
And is that
Dr. Eddy Finley. Yes, sir.
Eddy Finley?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So I went and saw him, and he immediately recognized that, well, I mean, as horsemen, we see a horse and we say, I like that horse, he needs some training. Dr. Finley was that for kids. He was for youth what horse trainers are for horses. And he spotted a rough little cowboy kid that he thought he could do something with. And he rounded me up and became my advisor and put me in the right classes and told me that he was willing to be the rodeo director if I was willing to run for president of the rodeo club and win. I mean, I made one pass through his office and he put his halter on me and said, you're going with me, son.
Good. Let me kind of back up to sort of the academic side. So you then selected the major then with Dr. Finley's help. Do you remember what did you get your degree in?
Well, I have a degree in ag economics.
Ag economics.
And I went that direction because when I looked through the animal science program, I grew up in animal science. I mean, I got a degree in animal science from the time I was 10 years old on. I worked at the horse farms that my dad was at. I had a tremendous background. But one of the things that I had seen is so many managers of horse farms and so many horse trainers don't have enough business sense to keep what they've earned and to manage a business, to stay out of tax problems, to do the book work. So I decided to major in something that I knew nothing about, that I thought I would need.
You mentioned Dr. Finley. Were there other faculty members, staff that influenced you in your personal student development when you're at OSU?
Without a doubt. Don Topliff was in the animal science department. Now, I'd be lying if I told you what his role in that was, where he was in it. But for me, there were three people on the OSU campus, period. And that was Dr. Finley, Dr. Topliff, and I'm embarrassed, I don't remember the Dean of Agriculture at that time. But
Was it Charles Browning?
I don't remember. I will tell you that I had gone to high school in Norman and done really well. I transferred from Weatherford. When you're on scholarship, they look after you. I mean, they let you know you don't have to decide whether to drop a class, or you got a coach that you meet with once a week, and they keep that rolling. So I went to Weatherford and had a silver spoon in my mouth as far as the school was concerned. I transferred to Oklahoma State with a 3.8. And I think I had an 18-hour .67 my first semester at Oklahoma State. I didn't understand the drop program, the grading on a curve. I got killed. And I wound up meeting with the dean, and they put me on academic probation. But I got to rodeo because I had transferred in there with such good grades. And you can believe I spent a lot less time in the rope and pen and a lot more time studying after that first semester. I got a pretty good schooling on the importance of a major university. You know, whether you go to class or not at Oklahoma State, nobody cares. They don't take roll, they don't check on you, it's up to you. That was good for me, but it was quite a shock from a small school where the coach, I mean, when we were at Weatherford, you went in and met with the coach about all your grades once a week. And then after a couple of weeks, he would post on the bulletin board who had to meet. And I'm a guy that doesn't like to get scolded or get in trouble, so I figured out right quick I was going to make my grades and not have to meet with him.
Sounds like you might have had a little bit of fun, too.
Oh, yeah, I did a little playing. I think that's one of the things that happens when you go to college. And Stillwater was a whole lot more fun than Weatherford. There was a lot going on in Stillwater.
I got to ask you, what were some of your favorite student hangouts on campus and off campus?
Well, the main staple that was there when Walt Garrison was there and was there when I was there was George's Staples. And it was this god-awful little bar.
Right across the street from Eskimo Joe's, right?
Right across the street from Eskimo Joe's, and walking distance from campus, and full of cowboy hats and sawdust. And it was a small town bar in a pretty big town. And, you know, back when I was in school, the legal drinking age was 18, and the strip was full of people during homecoming. And Stillwater was, there were plenty of distractions in town for somebody that wanted to play.
That's great. You alluded to the rodeo program. I'd like to back up and maybe ask you some questions kind of about the OSU rodeo program, if it's okay. First of all, I mean, facilities-wise, did you have an arena?
No, we built one.
Okay. Where did you build it?
It was north of the university. Do I remember exactly where? No. But Dr. Finley and some other people got that pulled together. I believe somebody donated the land. Wow. Anyway, Rusty Rust and I and Brad and Kenny Bailey were close friends. We rodeoed together. We had known of each other from high school rodeo, but we weren't close. Rusty had bought his first steer wrestling horse from me, and that's when I had met him. He and I both roped left-handed, and we became close friends. And I'm not, when I say we built the arena, I'm not talking about we supervised it. I'm talking about we dug the holes. We wore welding hoods till 10 o'clock at night. We built that arena. And there were a lot of people that volunteered, but there was about 15 of us that worked our guts out getting it built.
How many, sort of maybe a two-part question, and if I'm asking a silly question, tell me, but one, total number of people that were in the rodeo club, and then the number that actually competed in rodeos?
That actually, when I was there, that actually beat the pavement and went to all the college rodeos all the college rodeos would be the question that you're asking. Yes. And those of us that went to all the college rodeos went to 4 or 5 rodeos a week because...
Is that many?
Oh, yeah. No, there was just one college rodeo a week. But it's these guys that are winning golf tournaments, they've been going to 3 or 4 golf tournaments a week, every week for years. If you want to be competitive at that level, you got to do a lot of competing. And Oklahoma's a state where, except for when it's miserably cold, there's somewhere you can go compete 4 nights a week.
How many would compete regularly?
There was 4 of us that went all the time, and that was the first 4 spirit riders.
Oh, really? Can you kind of name those real quick?
It was me and Rusty Rust.
And what's
Raymond Rust III is his name, but Rusty Rust, he grew up in Rush Springs. And then Brad and Kenny Bailey were brothers that grew up at Surreal. I still keep up with all of them. We're good friends, were then, still are. And we traveled together. We all crawled in the truck and hauled our horses together. And then there was a handful of kids that competed some, but we probably had 30 kids on the rodeo. And Dr. Finley was one that taught me that we needed those members, and we needed to do community service, and we needed to include everybody. He was the first person to ever really teach me the importance of civic activity and including others and the benefits of that.
So what years is he? You came in the spring of 83. And then how many years did you compete? In 3 years?
I competed for Oklahoma State 2.5 years.
Okay,
You only get 4 years of eligibility. And then Dr. Topliff convinced me to be on the horse judging team after I was out of rodeo eligibility.
Okay. So you would have been in the spring of 84 through about 87.
Actually, no. I've got to look at that, but I left in December of 86. And I don't remember if it shows me graduating then or not, because I wound up with an incomplete in a class. I had already taken a job in North Texas and had to come back. My grade was a C. It was a class that was a substitute class, so I wasn't worried about it. And he gave me an incomplete instead of giving me my C, so I had to drive back to Stillwater and satisfy those guidelines. So I don't know if it shows me, but I went to work in Frisco, Texas in December of 86.
Just a quick one question. And so I'm asking you so it's not bragging, all right?
Sure.
How did you do competition?
College rodeo, really, really well. I was third in the region in the calf roping one year and third in the region in the steer wrestling one year. In the steer wrestling my junior year, they had 14 college rodeos and I got 12 checks in the steer wrestling. I had a lot of fun with it, but I was very competitive.
That's great. So you say you got checks?
Yeah, they do pay.
Did you even as a sort of an amateur, if you will?
It's an amateur status, but it was afforded a different status because we had to pay our own way, and we paid our own entry fees. So they paid back what the students put in entry fees.
Okay. John, in addition to, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but in addition to your rodeo club activities and not counting Spirit Rider at this point, were there any other activities that you're engaged in as an undergraduate?
There were, simply because Dr. Finley required it. I had never been involved in any of that kind of stuff. Certainly grew up where, Christmas and this and that, we wore a coat and tie, but I didn't take any of that to college with me. All I wanted to do was rodeo. And young people that are committed to rodeo, if you're having a little success, there's amateur rodeos all over the Southwest. And we rodeoed every weekend. We rodeoed Christmas weekend, Christmas break, Thanksgiving. We rodeoed every weekend. And once I got involved with Dr. Finley, he insisted that I be in the Ag Student Council and that I go to some of the, and I don't remember all of the structure, but I know that all the colleges of agriculture, all of the colleges at Oklahoma State have their own student councils. And then there's an entire council for, there's the College of Agriculture, College of Business. There's a lot of colleges in a university, and he insisted that I be involved in that and that we wear coats and ties and that we be professional. And I had learned parliamentary procedure in FFA in high school and had done a few speech contests and this and that. But I had no interest in recognition. I had no interest in putting something back. I had no concept of doing for others just because you should. Yeah. And Dr. Finley was adamant that all of that get done. And he, Dr. Finley understood that the team follows the lead dog. And that's the way it is. If you've got a sled team hooked up, where the lead dog goes, where the team goes, and so that's where the sled goes. And if you were going to be part of Dr. Finley's team, you were going to run lead part of the time.
And Cindy, you mentioned also you were on the horse judging team.
That was after I completed my rodeo eligibility, and that was a situation where, like I said, Dr. Topliff and Eddy Finley, and they were acquaintances, but they both had a gift of spotting young people and wanting to shape them. And Dr. Topliff had a pretty good rodeo career and had convinced me that it was dead end and that I needed to rodeo less and prepare myself for a career in the horse business. And when I ran out of rodeo eligibility and wasn't through with school, Dr. Finley came and got me. I'd like to tell this story because Dr. Topliff came and got me, but this was a game changer for me also, lifetime. He came and told me he had 3 kids that he thought could win the Congress and the world in horse judging. but he just didn't feel like he had a fourth that could help carry him. And I told him I had no interest in horse judging. He said, well, just try it. I had never given reasons. I had never been in part of showing, none of that. And he said, I'm going to do an experiment with you, John. Some of the reasons I hear all sound the same. So I want you to speak plain, and I want you to give your reasons. He wouldn't let me listen to anybody else give reasons. He made me learn how he thought it ought to sound. Mm-hmm. And we went to, and I worked at it that fall, and I was sick of it. We met and looked at horses and met and looked at horses, and I was absolutely sick of it. But we went to the college regionals, and I don't remember. Yes, I do. I can chronologize. The college regionals were in the spring. It was the only horse judging contest in the spring, and we went. It was at Las Cruces, New Mexico, and we did really well. I did well in the reasons room. I was the high individual in the halter side of it, which includes your halter scores and your reasons score. And Dr. Finley was pleased. Dr. Topliff was pleased, and I was pleased. It was a lot of fun. Well, we got back there in the fall, and I wasn't rodeoing. It was going to be my last semester, and Dr. Topliff was taking up a bunch of our time with horse judging, like Saturdays, evenings. You got to look at a lot of horses if you're going to be competitive at that level. And you can look back in the pictures. My hair was long, and I was rodeoing and wasn't that concerned about all of it. And I was sick of Dr. Topliff, and I went in and told him I didn't think I wanted to be on the horse judging team. And he got up and shut the door in his office. And he said, Beall, you got a shoebox full of buckles you've won. You've lived your whole life for yourself and what you wanted. And I got 3 kids here that have never won a belt buckle at the college level, and they can't win this by themselves. And it's time for you to quit being selfish and do something for somebody else, even though it's not what you want. And that's what I expect of you. And I left there with my tail between my legs and was mad at him and embarrassed. And I stayed on the horse judging team, and we won the Congress and the world.
Wow.
And it was an amazing teaching experience for somebody that I looked up to light me up and say, son, it's time for you to stop being selfish and do something for somebody else. And you don't need to win this, but these kids do.
So the Congress would be like U.S.?
The United States. It's a huge horse show. It's the All-American Quarter Horse Congress.
And for college.
It's in Ohio. No, it's a national
open
horse show that qualifies horses for the AQHA World. But they put on a collegiate horse judging contest. Okay. And the 2 big collegiate horse judging contests that all the ag colleges want to win is the Intercollegiate Horse Judging Contest at the All-American Quarter Horse Congress and the Intercollegiate Horse Judging Contest at the World, at the AQHA World Show.
Do you remember where those 2 events were held that year?
They're held the same every year. The Congress is in Columbus, Ohio. It's an old, famous horse show. And then the other one's at Oklahoma City at the fairgrounds. Wow. And it was a lot of fun. Dr. Topliff had experimented with me with reasons, and I'm telling this story to brag on Dr. Topliff, not on me. They had a kid at at Texas A&M, that had won everything in the high school horse judging. Mm-hmm. He was supposed to be really, really good. And the way you have a 50-point class, and they cut those classes on points. It's pretty simple, but there's no reason to explain it for this interview other than you get the best you can have in the reasons room is a 50. The best you can have when you place the horses is a 50. If they have 2 really good horses, there won't be many points between them. In other words, if they've got 2 really good horses and you've got them switched, you don't lose very many points. But they had 2 world champion mares in one of the halter classes, and I had them switched from what the judges have. So going to the reasons room, this kid from A&M had 1 point on me. And again, I had done some good in the reasons room at the regionals, but the first big horse judging contest I ever went to was the Congress. And I didn't know they don't let you see the placings, so I had no idea that I had a switch in the world champion mares, but they were good enough you could get away with that if you said the right things. One of them was heavier muscled, one of them was a cleaner, different type of horse, and you needed to say that. The A&M coach had commented to Dr. Topliff, our coach, that his kid had outplaced me because I beat this kid from A&M at the regionals in the halter. And the A&M coach had made sure Dr. Topliff knew that that would never happen again. Well, we went into the reasons room with the A&M coach a point ahead of me. And a 50 is a perfect score. I talked to 49 and a 50 on 2 sets of reasons. I dropped 1 point and beat that kid and was high individual at the Congress in the halter. And Dr. Topliff gets the credit for that, for wanting a different style of reasons. A straight shooting, here's what I saw, here's the reason I placed them this way. And it was really fun. Dr. Topliff was, and I still see him, he's an AQHA judge. He judges at the World Show. He's not at Oklahoma State anymore. He's at a college in Amarillo to be near the AQHA, but he's a fine man. But we were at the Congress. He had taken the whole team up there in a van. We took some kids that weren't going to get to judge in the contest, but they had worked hard. And the Congress is like a small town set up at this horse. I mean, there's a cleaners, there's barber shops, so about the evening before the contest started, Topliff corners me in front of everybody and says, "Are we going to win this thing?" And I said, "Well, that's what we're here for." And he said, "Then you're going to get a haircut." And I said, "Well, okay." And he said, "You're going to get the kind of haircut I want." And I said, "Okay." So we went in the barber shop with the whole horse judging team, and I got me a little boy's regulars, what I'd call it.
Marine Corps boot camp.
Well, it wasn't quite Marine Corps, but it was a heck of a cleanup from what I was wearing. You know, we're back to young men wearing long hair, and that's the way it was in the 80s, and I joined in with all that. But you can believe when I went in the reasons room, I had me a Dutch bob. And Dr. Topliff said, "If you're a team player, you need a haircut." He was
You
a
look
straight
like one of the good old boys, didn't you?
Well, except I had white walls because there hadn't been any sun hit where they cut all that hair off.
Well, let's John's kind of switching and talking about your spirit rider experience.
Okay.
Dr. Eddy Finley, you referred to earlier, faculty member in the college, is I guess kind of considered the father of the spirit rider program at Oklahoma State.
Without any doubt, he's not kind of considered it. He is. He is it.
Well, it was his vision, his leadership that helped, as you said, initiate the program. And so my question kind of that is, when did you first hear about the proposed program? Was it from him?
Well, there wasn't a program. And it's fun that we've been telling these stories because he is the father of the Spirit Rider program without a doubt. I am certain that a couple of college kids would have screwed that up. But Dr. Topliff factors in there big time too, because as the program grew and the program got its own horse, the Oklahoma State horse program had to provide housing for that horse. So this goes back to, I mean, it's just it's an amazing order of events that involved my life and my parents and Rusty and his parents and Dr. Topliff and Dr. Finley. I was rodeoing and had enough success, and they didn't have enough agricultural stuff for the OOHRP. In each of the colleges each of the colleges at the university, there's somebody trying to get recognition for their college. Mm-hmm. And I had done some good at the college rodeos, so the OOHRP runs a picture of me and my horse Della rodeoing for the college. And then the athletic director contacts the College of Agriculture about the guy with the black horse. They route that call to Dr. Finley, and Dr. Finley puts together what became the Spirit Rider program using Dr. Topliff's help also.
John, what kind of background did he then give you a call?
Oh yeah, but now you got to understand, Dr. Finley and I talked every day.
Okay.
We talked Saturdays and Sundays. He was my second dad, and we were close friends. Mm-hmm. But like my dad, if I was running things responsibly and in order, mm-hmm. Dr. Finley and I were friends. Mm-hmm. And if I stumbled, he was dad, and he took over. But I saw him every day, and we did stuff together a bunch. So he called me in his office and he said, "Hey, the AD wants somebody to ride a horse at the first football game and bring the players on the field," and I'm way excited. He was a Texas Tech graduate. So he immediately said, "This needs to grow. This needs to be huge."
Yeah, I want to kind of continue on with John. When he first sat down with those meetings in his office, I guess visiting, what did he say? How did he explain it to you? What was his vision that you got from that conversation?
Well, Tom Carroll is a good friend of mine, and he and I rodeoed some together too. And Dr. Finley called Tom and I in there first and said, "This is what I want to happen, and I want you guys to make it happen. And I'm gonna design it where it's safe." And my first reaction was, I don't have any interest in doing that. Because I wanted rodeo, and that's all I wanted to do, and football games were on Saturday, and I couldn't imagine that that'd be fun, you know. Why do you want to ride around a football game when you go rodeo, you know?
And again, when was this? Do you remember, was this in?
Well, it had to happen pretty fast because, you know, we got to school in the fall. There was very little prep time.
So this
I mean, they
fall
ran that article about the rodeoing and had a picture of me in the fall, and the athletic director calls the next day, and we had, you know, 15, 16 days to get ready for the first football game.
This is the fall of 1984, would have been?
Without a calendar, I would guess that's right, but I'm not going to say that I know that's right. But it went together. We had to get it on.
And the athletic director was Myron Roderick at that time. I mean,
I don't remember that.
but so
I can tell you some of the guys on the football team, Leslie O'Neill and Rusty Hilger, and
yeah.
we had pretty good backfield. We had Barry Sanders and
Yeah, pretty good.
Thurman Thomas.
Yeah.
It's pretty decent. And that plays into part of the history of the Spirit Rider too, because OSU had a really good year that year, and we start the Spirit Rider program in one of their winningest years to that point.
John, we kind of picked up the conversation about when he said, and then you weren't interested, but how did you, talking to you and Tom Carroll, how did he explain it to you? I mean, what did he say about it?
Dr. Finley came from, I mean, it's amazing how all of this came together. Dr. Finley, because they have a horse-ridden mascot at Texas Tech, Dr. Finley immediately wanted that for Oklahoma State. So when that presented itself, his vision was to turn it into the Spirit Rider program. We had simply been asked to lead the band from where the band marched over to the stadium as a part of the pregame. And we were to lead them over there and then lead the football players on the field, and that was to be that. But Dr. Finley had a lot more in mind than that. He knew if we could get that horse on the field and make the crowd like it, he could set it up to suit him, and that's what he intended from the get-go. And he shared that with Tom and I. And that sounded like a bunch of work to me and no fun.
You sort of just trying to get some background help. The masked riders, what they call it there at Texas Tech. Now, Dr. Finley, he went to school at Texas Tech.
Yes.
So he was familiar with the masked rider program.
And he grew up in he grew up in West Texas, not too far from Texas Tech. That was the nearest university. So that mascot program really interested him for the football field.
So why do you think he selected you or asked you to do it?
Well, there's not any question. Dr. Finley had selected me to be a lead dog for several years there in the rodeo program, and he had pushed me to do things, and I'm telling you, we had shut the office door and squabbled about it. But through that, when you work with somebody that thinks a lot of you and has a lot of expectations of you and a lot of respect for you, you develop a mutual bond. And he and I, you know, he said, you're going to run for rodeo president and you're going to win, and we're going to be the college. We were the outstanding club in the College of Agriculture, because he said that's what we're going to do. And he had set these goals, and he had pinned those leadership expectations on me, and we had done the things that we had set out to do without exception. And in the event that I didn't like a member of the club, or Dr. Finley would read that I was frustrated with something, boy, we'd have a closed door session, and he'd explain to me that if I didn't think it would work, nobody else would either. And it was the most leadership character training that I could have ever gone through. And it wasn't, Dr. Finley wasn't a drill sergeant. He was a soft-spoken, kind man. But it was as much a training session as if you were in Officer and a Gentleman. He didn't have me doing push-ups while he screamed at me. But he had the ability to stop my whole rodeo program. He had the whole thing in his hand. And he said, you're going to need to do this, this, and this, or you don't need to be rodeoing. And he had every intention of making all of us, that core four, go somewhere with our education. And I am confident that I wouldn't have finished college and wouldn't be where I am today without he and Dr. Topliff. And they talked some, but when they talked, it was, if Dr. Finley was having a problem with me and I wasn't hearing him, Dr. Topliff would roll into my life at the rodeo arena somewhere and need to talk to me, and it'd be the same speech coming from a different guy. They absolutely had goals for me, and they wanted me to do something with my life, and they pretty much saw that happened. And when Dr. Finley sat down about the Spirit Rider program, he said, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, "No." And he never said another word. And then when Tom and I left, and Tom and I are still friends. Tom's brother and I are very close. But he called me back in his office and he said, "I went about that wrong, because this is something I really, really want. And the Spirit Rider program needs to be at OSU. Pistol Pete is an awesome tradition, but that's a huge football field. And it's hard for Pistol Pete to ignite the crowd like a horse and rider can. And this is a big deal to me. This is a dream of mine, and I need your help." There wasn't any way to say no. I mean, the man that's just helped me get done everything I want to has just laid it out, that I want this to happen, and I want you to help me make it happen, and I've helped you, and this is a dream of mine. And, you know, the correct answer was yes, sir, and that's one I gave him.
I was trying to envision you. I mean, of course, you know, we're looking backwards and we're looking in the rearview mirror, but you didn't know to be the success that it is now, but then you had the chance to be the first Spirit Rider and say, "No, I don't think I want to do it."
Well, I didn't think any of it through. You got to understand that I had tunnel vision about what I was going to do with my life. And of course, I was looking down the wrong tunnel, and I know that now, but I didn't then. But Dr. Finley and Dr. Topliff and my parents did know that. And they did know that I had chosen a dead end gravel road when there was a freeway right over from it. And they knew it, and they worked hard to get me on the freeway. That story I tell about Dr. Topliff and horse judging and being unselfish, that was after the Spirit Rider program. And the reason that's so important, you know, when the Spirit Rider program took off, everybody on campus knew my name. I mean, it's not possible to go to a university that size and every building. I mean, I spent 2 years being Elvis Presley. I mean, everybody on campus knew you.
Pretty cool, huh?
You go in a classroom of 150 kids and the prof knows one guy, you. I mean, we'll get into that later, but my dog went to class with me. My dog's in the yearbook 20 times. I mean, it was phenomenal. And I thought I could do whatever I wanted to, and that's when Dr. Topliff decided it was time for me to do something for somebody else.
Well, question, was it Dr. Finley that come up with the name Spirit Rider?
To my guess, it is. It certainly wasn't me. At that point, my creativity involved things that weren't academic.
John, when I was visiting with Eddy Finley's wife, Nancy, recently, she indicated there was a tie with the band. It was pretty strong that maybe even that first year, the idea was that the Spirit Rider was perhaps even a mascot kind of the band. Do you remember any of that?
Oh, I do. And in fact, you bring that up and that jogs my memory. It may have been the band director that got with Dr. Finley and then involved the athletic director. But the way that the original format was that I was going to bring the band from where they come out of their building, and I can see it in my mind, but I can't draw it up for you. But they march, a block and a half or 2 blocks through the campus into the stadium while people are filing in to get their seats. It's part of the whole pregame, get excited, hype. And it was the band director's vision that I would lead the band into the stadium and then lead the football field through the band as they come onto the field. So we started out part of the band. We wound up ranked as a cheerleader. We wound up
Spirit team.
The Spirit team was part of the cheerleading team. I guess in all of those things, they have to be categorized. Now, at that time, when we started that, there was no funding.
I want to ask you a little bit about that, but I want to ask you a couple questions. The first year, was it considered, because you're talking about everything needed to go right, was it considered a trial year? I mean, this is where we're
You know, I will tell you that Dr. Finley was probably the most organized man I've ever known in my life. I mean, once I got out in the world and started trying, I didn't understand why he was this was a very deliberate man about lists and schedules and calendars, and I didn't understand all that because I have a good memory, and I just, my life was about winging it. We didn't have cell phones then. We didn't have electronic calendars hooked to our pockets or our belts, and I missed a lot of meetings, but if there was any chance that it was one I had to be at, Dr. Finley tracked me down the night before and told me what time to be where. Once I got out in business and began trying to coordinate more than I could remember, I reverted to the skills that he had taught me subliminally, quietly, that you write stuff down, that you get organized. So to answer your question, the Spirit Rider name, the format, the trial year, Dr. Finley shielded us from every bit of that. He and let me tell you that he was on the sidelines at every game in his cowboy hat. Dr. Finley had grown up on a ranch. He was a cowboy for real. He was a cowboy at heart. He knew the things that could go wrong with horses. And he was, you could be led to believe that he was the father of the Spirit Rider program, but I'm talking about he was the guy with the shovel picking up the mess on the sidelines. He was the guy that decided left-handed guys on that side of the horse, right-handed guys on this side of the horse. If you have to push one of the band members down, don't let him touch the horse. It won't make the news if you push him down. It'll make all the papers if a horse pushes him down. I mean, he was hands-on beyond anything you can imagine. And anything he thought might go wrong or thought might intimidate us, he didn't share any of that with us. I know now that he coached us about those things, but he shielded us from any concept of things go wrong or you could do something foolish or, none of that. And he was on the field. I've got pictures of me at a number of the games, and Dr. Finley was in arm's reach of me on the horse all the time. He was not going to let it fail.
You said in many different ways what Dr. Finley meant in your life. Any other comments you want to make about how he impacted your life and importance to your personal growth?
Well, we were absolute opposites. Back when I was a kid, there was a show called The Odd. Was it the Odd? It was two guys. They lived together. One of them was very organized and very much a neatnik. The other was an absolute slob, and they were roommates. And Dr. Finley and I were that opposite. I did everything by the seat of my pants. I can make a decision in 2.5 seconds. I don't have to think it through. I'll force it to work even if it's the wrong decision. I'll never admit that I made a mistake. That was my whole style. And Dr. Finley is the most deliberate man I know. He was a huge blessing to come into my life because he insisted on things being planned out, things being organized. And he insisted that I learn to do that. He absolutely set me up to fail and would set me up again until I could organize any kind of civic get-together. He would never tell me this is how we're going to do it. He would say, how are we going to do this? And I already knew he knew how we were going to do it. And he wanted to be sure that I had learned how to put it together in a format that suited him. And it was a lot of work before he'd say, how are we going to do this? And I'd tell him, and he'd say, that's right, let's do it. But he, instead of saying, this is how we're going to do it, and me getting to go through it like a puppet, he forced me to learn to organize things in a manner. And he understood liability. He understood university. There was a lot of tradition. There was quite a bit of opposition for the Spirit Rider.
Really?
Well, of course, because Pistol Pete, during the football games, takes a back seat to the Spirit Rider as a mascot because the horse can cover the whole field. And the traditionalists were very much not in favor of having a mascot other than the traditional long-term Pistol Pete mascot. So Dr. Finley faced some opposition. He shielded us from a bunch of that. But in terms of him being in my personal life, we became very, very close personal friends. Dr. Finley had a heart attack and then had a lot of heart problems and died. I gave the eulogy at his funeral. I dedicated the garden in front of Ag Hall for him and agreed to Nancy to be the guardian of his kids if anything happened to her. I still have that letter in my safety deposit box. Last year, Rusty Rust and I buried Eddy Finley's sister next to him because we agreed to do that before he died, and that was 25 years ago. Sorry about that. He was...
No, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, and I appreciate
very,
it.
very important in my life. He was a game changer for me. He took my dreams and shaped them. I didn't have to give up my dreams, but he helped me figure out that I needed to tweak it a little if I was going to have a good career. And we're sitting in this office right now, and I've had a really good career, and a lot of that had to do with him.
Appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit about your experience as being a spirit rider. So first of all, that first year you rode, what horse did you ride?
Della. She was a horse that I was rodeoing on. She was my calf horse. She wasn't my quietest horse, but she was black, and Dr. Finley felt like the spirit rider needed to be riding a black horse.
And you own this horse, this is your horse?
This is my own horse.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Della?
Della. And she was a really good rodeo horse. We won a lot of rodeos on her. She had some good professional rodeo cowboys win big rodeos on her. She had been to the Astrodome at Houston. She had been to the Coliseum at Fort Worth, Oklahoma City. She was the real deal.
So she'd been in front of some pretty good sized crowds.
Yes, sir.
The points, great. Well, and how old was she at that time, at 84, when you were first year spirit rider?
Golly, I don't have any idea. I mean, 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we had rodeoed on her several years.
And as you alluded to earlier, I understand there's a third member of your team.
Yes, I had.
You want to talk about that?
I had a little blue heeler dog. When I was in school at Rutherford, a guy gave me a blue heeler puppy, and I'm an animal trainer. Have been since I was a kid. So she did all kinds of tricks, and she was lots of fun. When we worked cattle together, and I had worked a lot of pasture cattle. I gathered cattle for people. I worked at the sale barn. I mean, she was a working dog. And she went with my horse all the time. And you know, everybody understands what a dog's supposed to do when they heel. Well, a dog, and I mean heel like an obedience command, where they walk beside you. Well, my dogs were trained to stay next to the horse unless I sent them after cattle or told them to stay. And I took her everywhere I went. And so the first football game, I was very careful to tell her to sit and stay, and then I'd go out on the field. And I want to allude to one other thing. They had some problems after my year. The Sooner Schooner bumped into a referee, and so they restricted mascots to within 30 yards, I think. But when I did it, there were no restrictions. And Pat Jones was the coach, and he loved it. And he would hold his guys off the field. So I would gallop down the visitor side as their team went off the field, their extra point team, or their field goal team, you know, their defense, their special teams. And then he'd hold our guys off the field, and I'd come back down the OSU side of the field as fast as Della could run. Just wide open down the field with that flag popping. It was big time fun. And I believe it was the second game, but I forgot to tell Hooker to stay. That was my little dog's name.
Didn't give it his command to stay?
I didn't give her a command to stay, so when I left there to go around the field, she went with me. And they have the little footballs, little plastic footballs they give out at all the games, you know, the little, and people started throwing them out on the field, and she picked one up and carried it off the field. She loved to retrieve. So we come off the field with the spirit rider and his dog, and she's carrying a football in her mouth. She carries it through the end zone. Everybody goes cheering like she scored a touchdown. And it went crazy.
The star was born.
Oh my gosh, I had fans bring her sweatshirts. I've still got probably 20 dog garments that fans gave her. I'm in the yearbook twice. She's in the yearbook, and all the sororities have her in their pictures, the cheerleaders. She went to class with me and would sit under my desk at all my classes. She went everywhere with me on campus.
That's because she was the spirit rider's dog. Because they're not supposed to have animals in the classroom, right?
She got to do it all. It was unbelievable. And you know, people said they may not remember I'm John Beall, but they know I'm the spirit rider, and that's Hooker.
And how old was Hooker at that time?
Probably 4.
4 years old.
I had her 15 years in all.
So you were the spirit rider for one season in 1984. In that
That's
fall.
correct.
Okay. Was it pretty? You know about this earlier, but you said it's pretty cool to be a spirit rider. All the everybody knew who you were because you got you and the old college probably picture and just on campus people saw you. Were you? I mean, how did people react when they heard you just casually someone said this is John Beall? He's by the way he's a spirit rider. If it just said maybe.
Well, there wasn't any of that. I mean, maybe there was a little reacting to do at first. I don't remember. But again, we talked earlier about the quality of football team we had that year. And OSU was winning lots of games, and everybody was fired up, and the horse running down the field was exciting. And I don't remember being introduced as the spirit rider except when Dr. Finley paraded me somewhere to speak, or, I mean, everybody on campus just knew. Just knew. And you know, I haven't been back to OSU in a long time, but you know, I wore a cowboy hat to class every day. I still wear a cowboy hat every day. So I looked a whole lot in class like I did sitting on that horse. That, you know, now they have orange chaps and a vest, but I wore my working chaps, and I wore my cowboy hat that I wore every day. So I wasn't too hard to pick out. I looked just like I did at the games. And it was, you know, there wasn't, but it was tremendous fun for everybody to know. The football team was winning. The horse at the football field, I mean, it just fit because the field is so big. And to go all the way around the field, I mean, at that time the wave was popular, and the stands would do the wave as the horse came around the field. It was just huge. It was so fun.
You remember what questions students would ask you, or kids would ask you?
Oh, you know, there was just a lot of curiosity about how do you get your horse ready for that kind of crowd? How do you get your dog to follow your horse? How do you get all this to work? And that was funny to me because those were things that I had been doing, fascinated by those questions, because I just assumed that everybody knew the answers because I had grown up knowing the answers. My dad's a horseman, and I had grown up around good horsemen.
Well, as spirit rider, alluding to your sort of your notoriety and people knowing you, was there an added responsibility and expectation of how you presented yourself, you know, your behavior in public?
Without any question. And Dr. Finley, again, you know, I got my dad, Papa John, and Papa Eddy. He sat me down and said, well, first of all, he was concerned. He felt like the responsibility of safety around a horse was absolutely the spirit rider team's responsibility, because we were going to be on a football field with a whole bunch of people. I mean, you got a guy carrying a tuba. You got Pistol Pete wearing this giant mask with a peephole in it. You've got some people that their safety around horses and their knowledge of horses is zero. So when this started, that's fun that you asked what year I was the spirit rider, and that I was a spirit rider 1 year. Dr. Finley said you need to pick your team, and we're going to have a team. Well, Tom Carroll and I were very close, but Tom was married and had 2 small kids, and being a part of our team didn't fit him. And Rusty and Brad and Kenny and I were all very close. So they were my hand-picked, Brad and Kenny Bailey and Rusty Rust. And I hand-picked them to help me. And you know, you need to understand how complicated this is. We don't get to pick when we draw up at a college rodeo. I mean, at one of the home games, the guys and I drew up Friday night at K-State. That's in Manhattan, Kansas. The ball game was Saturday. We drive to Manhattan, Kansas and rodeo. When the rodeo's over, we drive all night back to Oklahoma State. Hauling horses, hauling Della. And Brad and I make the short go in the team rope, and I make the short go in the calf rope and in the bulldog. And so when the football game's over, we load back up and drive all night back to Manhattan, Kansas. We drove all night Friday night and all night Saturday night and took turns driving in order to make the ball game and all be at the college rodeo. So it was a strenuous schedule, and we were close friends. As far as me being the spirit rider 1 year, those guys had committed to me to help with that program, and we pulled it off with big success. Dr. Finley and the people in charge asked me if I wanted to be spirit rider again, and I need you to know there was no way to say yes. It would have been fun, but I had 3 guys that had given an entire season to helping me, and somebody else needed that chance. And so Rusty was next, and all 4 of us decided that he was next because he was slated to graduate ahead of the others. And we had an obligation to the guys that helped make it work to let somebody else be next. And I'm pleased with that now, because there's so many people that want to be spirit rider that I don't think anybody should be spirit rider twice.
It seemed like, John, as I reflect, that there's been some exceptions. I think Ty maybe a couple of years, Cunningham, but most of them have been 1 year.
I didn't know there had been exceptions, but I haven't kept up. But I felt like that needed.
Well, most of them, though, it's been probably 1 year.
Well, my deal was that I couldn't very well not let Rusty be next, and Brad be next, and Kenny be next, because that's what I had agreed to if they'd help me make it work. It took a heck of a time commitment from all of us, and it meant all of us got to rodeo less.
So, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about riding horse on the field, 50,000 people on the screaming and all the things are going on, and Pete and the bands and distractions, etc. Well, how did you prepare Della for this experience? We talked about, first of all, of course, her having been to the rodeo, so it really helped. But what did you do to get? Did you work with the band?
Oh yeah, and that's another part of Dr. Finley's corresponding and coordinating and making everything work. As soon as this came up, Dr. Finley, I mean, that you and I are having this conversation and we're taking our time. Dr. Finley had a sense of urgency about everything he did, and he would try not to show that, but you could certainly tell when something. And you know, when I agreed to do it, we were at band practice the next day. The band would practice at the stadium, you know, and the band is kind of something that us students take for granted. You know, you hear them over there playing at 9 o'clock in the morning when you're going to class, and you don't think about it and you don't care. But as soon as that started, Dr. Finley met me at band practice at, I don't know what time they started, but it was in the morning, and I'm there with the horse, and my guys are there, and Dr. Finley had sat down and choreographed with Brad and Kenny and Rusty, and we had one other person helping us, and I don't remember who that was, and I'm embarrassed by that. But maybe we took a volunteer from the rodeo team. I can look back in the pictures. But the deal was that Dr. Finley had cleared for them that they were blockers, and that I was to ride Della on and off the field through my team every time. And the purpose of that was that, you know, you just don't know when somebody's going to take a wrong step. And they never had to push anybody down or manhandle anybody. But if somebody was starting into the alleyway that they had formed for me, they put their hands on them. They didn't take any chances on a person being in the tunnel, the alleyway, if you will, that they built for me to ride her through. And from the beginning of band practice, if I walked through the band, those 4 guys walked through the band. Dr. Finley had set it up where nobody could back into a horse and get kicked or get stepped on. He was very, very careful because he wanted it to succeed, and he wanted no negative press.
John, we talked about the routine kind of game days. You started with the band, lead the band over to the football field, but could you kind of explain it and then talk about getting your routine and when you rode out on the field, etc.?
Well, and I don't remember all of it. I would have to go back and look. I'm certain it can be looked up, although it's not that important whether it was the first game. The way I remember it was the first game. I know this part. This part I know for sure. I was to go over to the band room, building, whatever that is, be saddled and ready, and walk in front of the band as the band paraded and played over to the stadium. And then the band lined up on each side of the tunnel where the football boys come onto the field. And me and my team backed up to that tunnel, and as the football players came on the field, I ran all the way across the field. They didn't go all the way across the field, but I did. But I led the team out onto the field.
Diagonal across the field?
Yes, sir. I diagonaled across the field. That's exactly right. I started over there where they start and went catty corner across the field. And they went to their sidelines, and then we were sitting in the end zone. And I'm pretty sure at the first game that we were asked to ride onto the field when they scored. And at that time, we didn't go very far onto the field for fear of getting in the way of the football game. But by the second game, everybody in the athletic football part of the athletic program was involved, including keeping the OSU guys off the field in time for me to go way down the field and come back down the home side.
So like nowadays, where they go out to about the 30-yard line and curl around and score, you'd go all the way down the field? Probably
to about the other 20. And I would start that as soon as, and you know, whether we kicked a field goal or we kicked an extra point, it was very easy. Somebody has to run out there and get the tee off the field. And when that kid left to get the tee, I would leave the end zone, but at a very controlled gallop. But by the time I made the other end of the field and started back, the special teams was off the field. And they would keep the OSU boys off the field, and I would let Della roll down the field. And you know, when you get a horse about 3/4 speed and that big old flag popping, it's a pretty cool sight.
You mentioned that. Can you tell me about how difficult it is? Because you're having to control your horse with one hand, and you got this flag. It's pretty daggum heavy. When you're riding fast, there's a lot of wind resistance. How's that work?
Well, the flag was pretty light, first of all, and it's not anywhere near as difficult as it is to jump off on a steer's head and throw him a rope a calf and flank him and tie him down. So,
John, we were talking about how do you hold the flag and kind of what the mechanics involved in that.
Well, the flag itself was fairly light. It does put some strain on your wrist. You have to angle that flag forward. you know, it's pretty traditional in flag carrying on a horse that you have a holster, if you will, to put it in the stirrup. But because of the size of the stadium and the dynamics of the stadium, you know, everybody's up above the horse and the horse is down in the bottom. So we had a very light flag, but it's a big flag, and you'd carry it up high to try to make the flag the profile of the. So it took a little getting used to, but it wasn't bad. But I'll tell you, that's Rusty and I are both left-handed, and I carried the flag in my left hand. When you're left-handed and you rope with your left hand. You keep the reins in your right hand. So I carried the flag in my left hand, and part of the way through Rusty's season, they let Dr. Finley know. I don't know how all that took place. Dr. Finley brought everything to my attention. So as far as I'm concerned, everything originated with him. But somebody was going to do a bronze of the Spirit Rider, and it's now on campus. And it's a right-handed, it's a guy carrying the flag in his right hand. It's clearly Della. They were careful not to make it Rusty or me, but it's clearly Della. But the flag's in his right hand, and what they did to get the bronze like they wanted was reverse the negative. And Dr. Finley explained to us that he wanted it to be all the Spirit Riders, not just the ones that had carried it left-handed. So the first 2 Spirit Riders carried that flag in their left hand, but you can't tell by the bronze.
Did the person that did the bronze and the Spirit Rider sets there outside the gallery, did they base that on you and Rusty at that time?
Yeah, they had to, because the only pictures they had was me. He was doing it, and I had finished. So, and it's very obviously Della. And that's a lot of fun. You know, my kids go up to campus and see that statue.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is that a source of pride? And I mean, positive pride.
Well, there's not any way for it not to be. You know, the opportunity to start something at a major university and start something positive comes along very rarely for anybody. And to be a part of that, and for that statue to be on campus, I've got a book that's about intercollegiate athletics, and it's got a whole page on Della and I. My son was a junior in high school, and his ag teacher was going through some ag material that they had, and finds a picture of me and Della and an explanation about the first Spirit Rider, you know, and my son's sitting in class when that goes down. So it's been an awful lot of fun.
So maybe Dad's not so bad after all, huh?
Oh, well, I'm as big a stickler for ethics and do the right thing as my dad was, so I'm pretty square where the boys are concerned at times.
John, go back and imagine with me that first game. You've led the band over the field, and you're over ready to bring the football team to the field. What's going through your mind? What are your emotions at that point?
Well, you know, again, I have to tell you that is very different for me than I think it would be for a lot of kids, because I had made the high school finals. I had had my rodeo success. Dr. Finley was excited as he could possibly be, and I was frustrated because I thought we were going to be done in 30 or 40 minutes, and now we got to stay for the whole game. You know, I was ready to leave, and part of the reason Hooker was actually out there with us is because it was too hot to leave her in the truck, and I had brought her, and we're going to be there all day, and so you know, it grew on me, and it became an awful lot of fun for me. But in the origin, I'm trying to help Dr. Finley have this thing that he's dreamed of, and boy, it's getting in my way. It's taking up a bunch of time.
But I'm thinking, you got to be thinking like, well, what if my horse stumbles? What if someone runs in front of us? I mean, those things got to be with you. This is your first time, and you want it to be right.
Actually, I know you. I know that would seem right to you, and to Dr. Finley, it was such a big deal. And to me, I wanted things to go right when I was rodeoing, and at that point, you know, my junior and senior year in high school, I made the Oklahoma High School Finals, the Oklahoma Youth Finals, the American Junior Rodeo Association Finals, and the National High School Finals. I mean, a tremendous amount of rodeo. And so assuming your horse is going to do right, trusting that things are going to work, that's a part of horse competition that you learn to accept. You can't back in the box and think about what's going to go wrong, or you'll never compete. So you have to overcome that and say nothing's going to go wrong today. And I had a whole lifestyle of that. And so he was concerned about all of that. It would have never crossed my mind. Dr. Finley insisted that it crossed my mind.
So we talked about the on the field routine. The times you'd lead the team out, diagonal across the field. Then on touchdowns and field goals, at that point you'd run the full length of the
80 yards of the field.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And any halftime, like
the halftime was taken up by the band, and halftime was our chance to go to the bathroom, get Della out of there, get her on the grass where she could go to the bathroom. Halftime was a time for us to regroup, just like it is for the football team.
Where did you keep Della at halftime, pregame, when she wasn't out on the field?
Well, Della was a rodeo horse. Della had spent lots of nights tied to the trailer. Della could go anywhere, and we'd drive up with Della in the trailer, and they had gotten us a place to park. They had done some things to look after us.
Just outside the stadium there?
Over near the band building. But, I don't like to tie a horse on the concrete, and it's not safe. So, we had gotten clearance, and I could back my trailer up to they had me a reserve parking place. And you know how football teams and games and college kids, and so they had to block off my parking place. And what we learned to do was park another vehicle there that was one of my buddies. So when we got there, we moved that vehicle and backed the horse trailer in, and Della was tied on the grass. She was tied to the trailer, but she was standing on the grass rather than on concrete. With horseshoes on, concrete's not a safe surface for a horse not slipping and falling. So we had to work out some of those details. But again, that wasn't left to us. I'm telling you, Dr. Finley, one of the things you could do when you were under his care is not worry, because that man worried about everything. He would worry about it for you. And every single detail was drawn up by the first time when we pulled up for practice the first time and didn't know where to park, Dr. Finley said, I'm going to fix that. We're going to have our own place to park. He just took care of all of that stuff.
Speaking of, I want to ask you about the horseshoes. Did you just wear the regular horseshoes on the field?
Actually, we did. She had, and I was still in a trap because they were concerned about the effect of the horseshoes on the field.
Right.
But we were rodeoing on her, and I was concerned about being able to win at college rodeos. That was first and foremost. So no, I wasn't going to change my competition shoes for the betterment of anybody at that point. But I didn't understand the magnitude of what we were doing. I just didn't. But we bought some. They make a rubber shoe boot. It's like a galoshe boot. It stretches over the horse's foot, and we stretched those over her feet. We did learn we couldn't use them when the field was wet because they don't have a cup in the bottom of them, and the way a horse gets traction is that cup in the bottom of their foot. Similar to, people that don't understand cars will think that the tread in a car tire is for traction, but race cars use slick tires. The grooves in your tire are to move water, and with those flat rubber shoes over her horseshoes, I made one round with those, and we were pulling them off. It's all I could do to keep her on her feet around that loop on a wet field.
I want to pick up on your comment earlier about when you're doing all this, what you said, I think you weren't aware of the magnitude of the program, what it was going to be. When did it first dawn on you that, hey, this is really a big deal?
Probably halfway through the season. Mm-hmm. The first week there's something in the OOHRP, big deal. Second week there's something in the Stillwater paper, big deal. 5 weeks into it, when none of the hubbub is quieted down, none of the excitement is quieted down, there's still something in the paper every week. There's still something in the OOHRP every time they come out with it. There's something in the Daily Oklahoman. There's something in the Tulsa World. And I know for young people watching this, the newspaper was huge at that time. We didn't have the internet. Nobody had a computer sitting in their office. Everybody went and got the paper to see the details of the game, the stats, the nuts and bolts of the offense and defense and what they hadn't gotten done. The newspaper was how that went down. And maybe 4 games into it, 5 games into it, I don't know, but every game, all the kids throwing their little footballs out on the field, hoping theirs was the one Hooker picked up. Trying to saddle Della with 25 people standing around the horse trailer, fans. When that didn't quiet down, when it got bigger every week instead of smaller, when it started, my guys didn't get there for me to saddle the horse and this and that. Maybe Rusty rode with me. But that wasn't something we were concerned about safety with. I'm over there at the band building. you know, second game, third game, fourth game, you can't get to and from the trailer for kids wanting to pet Della and parents. And, you know, it's not safe when a lady's got a kid in a stroller and she's holding one and she's 5 yards from your horse. And they're not horse people. So it went from the football game to the football day. I mean, we couldn't pull through. When we're pulling in, and you got to understand, this isn't an OSU truck and trailer. This is just my pickup and my horse trailer, and we're pulling in, and everybody knows there's only one reason for there to be a horse here. And suddenly we've got the windows down, and people are screaming and yelling, and we're putting on a public appearance. From the minute we get 2 blocks from campus, I mean, we leave where I keep my horse. And of course, we're getting to the football field as fans are getting to the football field. People are honking. People are I mean, we're trying to drive down University Street, and people are going crazy because there goes the Spirit Rider. And so, you know, several weeks into that, you begin to realize this is crazy. And you know, Rusty played high school sports, so did the Baileys. I quit high school sports to rodeo. I never went to an OSU basketball game. To this day, I have never been to an OSU football game that I watched anywhere from Della. Except the only OSU football games I've seen in my life, I sat on a horse. That's all I cared about. I still ride a horse every single day. I train horses for a living. But I didn't go to high school football games or high school athletics, so you know, you took a country kid and put him in a spot he wasn't ready for, and as it grew, honestly, it was humbling. It wasn't something that made you cocky or arrogant. It gave me tremendous respect for Dr. Finley's ability to know that's where it was going to go and to have already prepared us for it, because, I mean, I had no idea.
Where did you said you took Della from where you kept her, where did you board her? I say, where did you keep her?
Well, you know, and that's another deal. The college rodeo program is very different from other college athletics. When we were at Weatherford at Southwestern, if you were on scholarship, they provided a place for you to keep your horse. You lived in the dorms. We had organized practices. At Oklahoma State, there wasn't any of that. You had to find a place to board your horse, and that's another deal. You know, I'd been the Spirit Rider about 2 weeks when this guy comes to me and says, "Hey, if you'll board your horse at my place, I won't charge you." And so I board my horse there, and then 25 other people do too, because they want to be boarded where the Spirit Rider was. So
you knew what he was doing.
It took off. It had a life of its own.
That's great. Well, do you have some stories? You know, favorite memories of your time as Spirit Rider? I mean, and we've shared a lot about it, but there's some human interest stories. There's some scary moments, some humorous events, some things you recall.
Well, there's a bunch of those. And so much of it, I mean, for all of us, Rusty was very much like Dr. Finley. He's an attorney now, and he does banking law, and he flies his own plane, and Rusty was that successful in high school. Rusty was a very deliberate person. So he and Dr. Finley shared a special bond also, very different from mine. I'm convinced that my whole life would be different without the whole program, and Rusty plays a very important part in that too, because I had a young Dr. Finley behind me and an older Dr. Finley in front of me, and Rusty and I became inseparable friends. I lived by the seat of my pants, and I don't now, but I did then, and there were no cell phones. So about the second time I made Rusty late somewhere, he said, "Here's the way it's going to work from now on. If I tell you I'm going with you and you're leaving at 3, if I'm not there, you leave at 3, and I'll do the same." Because he did, and that was our agreement. And we rodeoed together and did stuff together. But we also did a lot of stuff apart. He was very much a part of the farmhouse fraternity and very, very committed to his education. And you know, I didn't spend any time worrying about what I was going to take next semester. Dr. Finley did, but I didn't. And Rusty was very, very deliberate. And then Brad and Kenny were brothers who were in the AGR house. And as far as special stories, it's hard to tell any one special story. But as that thing grew and exploded, and here's 4 of us, and you know, I grew up in Norman, but I grew up south of Norman, and I didn't spend much time involved in school. Rusty and Kenny and Brad had gone to small schools in small towns. So this whole everybody knowing who we were, certainly there were stories in the OOHRP. Everybody knew who they were too. Their fraternities were so proud of the fact that they were a part of the Spirit program. And, you know, for me, it was very, very humbling. It was amazing to go in and eat, and everybody knew where you were or who you were. It was all of a sudden I had this responsibility to my friends that I had never had. This was a bigger deal to everybody around me than it was to me. And that was a tremendous responsibility for me because I had never been in a spot. You know, one of the advantages of rodeoing is it's all up to you. But one of the disadvantages of rodeoing, and particularly when you quit team sports as young as I did, is I had no concept of being a team player. Honestly, I was a very selfish person at that point in my life. It was my horse. It was my picture in the paper that got it started. It was me that got the rodeo program going. I was not a humble person, and I believed that all of this was working because of me. And as it grew bigger than any one person could do, and it meant so much to the AGR house and the farmhouse and the College of Agriculture, it forced me to recognize that this is a big deal to a lot of people, even though at that point it wasn't. I still was focused in going to the college national finals and the things that I wanted. I was still very dialed in on my dreams. And this thing suddenly was so big and it was so important to people that had dedicated a lot of their time to me that I found myself having to be a team player and making some appearances that I wouldn't have made because Brad and Kenny, it was important to them, or it was important to Rusty, or it was important to Dr. Finley. And then the responsibility of, I mean, and I'll be honest with you, those guys were serious about academics. They grew up farming, they grew up keeping records. They were, Rusty, Brad, and Kenny were all more mature than me. I was still very much a party guy. I was having fun at college. I was rodeoing. I didn't need a degree. I was going to rodeo for a living. I would have categorized myself as some of the young athletes we see today that aren't managing themselves with the tremendous opportunity that they have. And Brad and Kenny and Rusty, particularly Rusty, could see that opportunity and were worried that I wasn't taking it to the level of seriousness that I should. And Rusty was a guy, he was younger than me, but I looked up to him. And Rusty would talk to me when we were driving about what he expected of the program and what he needed from me to maintain our friendship. And we still have that kind of frank friendship.
John, you talked about the Spirit Riders apparel and the tag for the horse herder, but I'd like to kind of zero in on some of that and see what it was like that first year, how it's changed. What was your apparel like? What did you wear?
First of all, for the college rodeos, that is a team sport. There's 4-man teams, and all of the college rodeo participants in any school are required to wear a vest that identifies what team they're with. So you know, when Dr. Finley agreed to be the rodeo advisor, and you know, you have to understand, we could have worn a T-shirt with the sleeves cut out that said OSU on it to meet the requirements of the rodeo requirements. But Dr. Finley got the kids together, and there were a number of kids on the rodeo team that were going to rodeo at the OSU rodeo and liked being on the rodeo team, and they designed a vest and a logo that we were rodeoing in anyway. So the picture running the OOHRP, I'm wearing cowboy clothes. You have to have a cowboy hat at the college rodeos. You have to have on a long sleeve shirt, and you have to have on a vest that identifies who you're with.
Would you describe the vest, what it was like that first year that you made?
The ones I saw on the rodeo team in a picture that I got from the Alumni Association last year looked just the same. They were a black vest with orange yoke trim. They had the OSU insignia on the back, you know, the running, it's got the OSU with the bar under the O and over the U. And then it had a little logo patch on it right here that said Oklahoma State University Rodeo Association. It was very simple.
You just wear your blue jeans in, or what?
Yes, we wore what we normally rodeoed in. I wore spurs to rodeo, so the only thing different, Dr. Finley had grown up on a ranch, and Tom Carroll had too, and I wore Tom Carroll's working chaps the first game. And then Dr. Finley brought out a beautiful, old, expensive, quality leather pair of leggings that he had worn all the time he was ranching with his daddy, and asked if I would wear his leggings the rest of the year if they fit.
Same shaps?
Shaps, yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, cowboys call them leggings. And his were a pair that his dad had made for him, and his dad had since passed, and they meant a bunch to him. And I wore them the rest of the season, and then he hung them in his house, and that was.
Color hat, because we were, it was
Wore black hat.
Black hat.
Black hat, black shirt with a black vest, blue jeans, and those leather chaps, but those were cowboy working chaps. They weren't orange, they were leather brown.
Mm-hmm.
They had blood on them from castrating calves and dirt and mud, and were worn leather. I wore cowboy boots. I rode a saddle. There's a very famous saddle maker down below Lawton named Howard Council, and I'd wanted a Howard Council saddle since I was old enough to rope. And I had a Howard Council saddle that I had a lot of miles on. I'm still riding it, and I've been in a lot of wrecks in it. And I rode my saddle and my tack. They did eventually bring me an orange saddle towel that they wanted me to put under my saddle, which I didn't do because I didn't want orange.
So what was your tack like for the horse?
Just a saddle and a breast collar and a girt, just my rodeo gear.
What, black, tan?
Nope, just leather color.
Leather,
yep,
natural
standard leather.
color.
They wanted us to use a fancy headstall and this and that. At that point, and I'm still that cowboy. I still don't have fancy tack. I have safe tack that's quality leather. Never was a fan of all the parade-looking show stuff. Neither was Dr. Finley, so they didn't get that pushed on us. We stayed with our cowboy gear.
John, let me, this is a good one maybe to ask. What, you know, when you first talked to Dr. Finley and you're saying, here's what the spirit rider needs to look like, here's what it symbolizes. Can we talk just a minute about what was his vision? I mean, I've heard one since that he really wanted to look more like just a working cowboy, but can you talk about what kind of symbol you want to create, what kind of image you want to create?
It was so easy for he and I. I mean, it was so easy. One of the things that ranch cowboys and rodeo cowboys have in common, and you know, the national finals is going on right now. Certainly the rough stock riders wear some pretty flashy chaps, and there's a reason for that, because their leg movements are very important. But the calf ropers and the steer wrestlers and the timed event cowboys, which evolved from the ranch cowboys, don't wear flashy, colorful stuff now. They didn't then. We didn't have any interest in looking like we had just come from a parade. Dr. Finley was a real ranch cowboy, and I grew up gathering cattle for people and working in the sale barn with a ranch heritage of the 4.6s and my dad's vision. And my dad drove as plain a vehicle as you could buy off the lot. There was, Dr. Finley and I came from a background where anything fancy means you're showing off. And you don't tell somebody how many cows you have, because that's like bragging. And so that was very simple for he and I. He and I didn't want the fanfare. We wanted to symbolize, and of course, Dr. Finley understood the tradition of a land-grant university, and the fact that university was built on the backs of working people that admired a college education and agriculture, and we intended to salute that tradition with an old-time working cowboy.
Appreciate that. Over the next 3 or 4 years, did that change? Did you call it the tack or what?
Well, you know, and again, I consider it a blessing. I have friends who still want to talk about high school football games, or still want to talk about. My whole life has been a forward progress. I don't do much looking back. I've not been to a single football game since I rode off the field. I wasn't a part of Rusty's team, and that was by design. I certainly could have been part of the Spirit Rider team. But the problem that Dr. Finley and I and Rusty and all of us felt like was that because I had gotten so much publicity as the Spirit Rider, for me to be there at all took the focus off of the next Spirit Rider, and that's not fair. So, I mean, I am 25 years out of school, and I haven't been back to the campus except to give Dr. Finley's eulogy and to dedicate that garden in front of Ag Hall. So I don't know much about the changes because I was busy trying to build a career. I was working on a big ranch, and managing 120 people and working horses, and I never looked back.
Picking up that theme just a little more, we talked earlier about Dr. Finley's kind of one of his concepts of spirit rider, basically kind of come from the masked rider at Texas Tech, who wore the silk outfit, kind of more of a Zorro kind of character, but then he had some difference. How could we just have a brief discussion and kind of your thoughts on how it was the spirit rider was similar to the masked rider, and how was it different?
Well, the way it's similar is that, one of the unique situations you have with any mascot program is the size of a football stadium and the dynamics of trying to use anything from the cheerleader. I mean, at a basketball game, at a baseball game, and baseball's bigger, but it's not like a football field. The cheerleaders, Pistol Pete, the Tiger from Missouri, they're very involved in the small area of the sidelines. The dynamic of the football field is that it's huge. And you know, these guys that do concerts for huge groups, they design ways to try to involve all of the audience in the concert. And certainly the similarities are that the masked rider and the spirit rider was intended to try to make everybody in the stadium get excited. Certainly part of home field advantage is that your crowd's excited and they're involved in the game, which makes it more difficult for the opposing team. So that's the similarity. The difference being that Dr. Finley and I's vision was to celebrate the people that had helped make Oklahoma. I mean, you have to understand, Oklahoma is a very special state. It was started with a horse race. It was started with a land run. The mounted cowboy is an incredible part of our heritage from when this was Oklahoma Indian Territory. You know, the Cimarron Trail goes through Oklahoma. The Goodnight Loving Trail goes through Oklahoma. All of the cattle headed to the railhead in Kansas came through Oklahoma. Yeah, and all of that's very, very important to the history of Oklahoma and the fact that we have a land-grant university, Oklahoma State University. So our interest was in the history of the state and the founding of the state, and obviously Oklahoma State has had that history a lot longer than Eddy Finley and I, or Pistol Pete wouldn't be the mascot.
John, you alluded earlier to Pistol Pete and kind of that comparison. Some people might ask the question, since we have Pistol Pete, why do we need a spirit rider? How would you answer that?
Well, there was some opposition there, and certainly in one of my frustrations in how kids are being raised today, in the watering down of government and history classes in school, one of the most important things that can happen in any education program is that we understand the past so that we don't make the same mistakes. So I'm very much a part of tradition, and neither Dr. Finley or I would have agreed that the spirit riders at the football game, so Pistol Pete isn't. We were not interested in disrupting any kind of tradition. But there's not any way to safely ride a horse in the Pistol Pete getup. That big mask is very difficult to see out of. So there wasn't any way to incorporate Pistol Pete. I mean, you can't go get a wagon and pull him around the field because OU's already doing that. So we were interested in creating a new tradition that mostly could speak to a huge venue the size of the football field and keep Pistol Pete on the sidelines, keep Pistol Pete cheering, keep Pistol Pete a tradition at all of the things, but do something to involve 55, 60,000 people, and that's pretty hard for one guy to do on foot.
Can you talk a little bit about, because being the first, I mean, it's really special if you'd have me that first spirit rider, but you mentioned Rusty and Brad and the others. I mean, could you speak a little bit about, you talked to them a little bit, but as spirit riders, as individuals, what could you say? Rusty followed you, and then was who?
Brad, and then Kenny, I believe.
Kenny Bailey.
Yes, sir.
And you guys, if I understand it correctly, were a little bit different in that you were the rodeo team crew, you used your own horses, and it changed a little bit after y'all left where the bull, and I want to get to that story, but first of all, tell me about the other three guys that you worked with. What someone, 50 years now wanted to know about the second, third, and fourth spirit riders. What would you say about them?
Well, first of all, they're still very close friends of mine. I shared with you that Rusty and I flew out to Allen Reed, Texas, made arrangements and got Dr. Finley. Dr. Finley's sister was in a assisted care living most of her life. She had some physical problems and she couldn't take care of herself. When Dr. Finley's mother couldn't take care of her anymore, he moved her to Billings, Oklahoma, which was up by Stillwater. But we told him before he died that we'd take care of burying her next to him. And we did. Rusty and I went out there and managed that funeral. Rusty mostly. Rusty's the detail guy. He still is. He's got Dr. Finley running all through him. But Rusty and Brad and Kenny, that's an amazing. I mean, again, I shared with you that I got my picture in the O'Colly, and Dr. Finley had just come to Oklahoma State. Those guys were rodeoing with me. These are guys who've gone on and been successful in life. Very, very good people from strong families. Never before or since in my life have I been surrounded with that kind of people. All three of those guys are as good of people as you. I mean, you'd send your grandkids with them today. And certainly when we rodeoed together, we were an odd group in that we were four different kinds of people, but we never struggled. I never remember having an argument with Rusty or Brad or Kenny. We just blended. We just fit. And we all knew Rusty was going to be next because he was going to be the next one to graduate. And then Brad because he was next. And then Kenny was next. One of the decisions that we had to make, Rusty and I were close enough, Hooker would have gone with him. But we didn't send Hooker with him because we felt like if we created a tradition of a horse and a dog, how do you train the next dog? Who does that? And rather than have OSU's dog and pony show, we let Hooker be a one-time tradition. Rusty rode Della the second year, then Brad and Kenny rode a little black mare they had named Penny. And after those 2 years, Oklahoma State was in a dilemma. And I don't remember where in there Dr. Finley became incapable of managing it through his heart attack and his health problems. But Dr. Topliff stepped in because Nancy asked him to. And then my dad and Rusty's dad rounded up a black gelding and bought him and donated him to OSU. The school named him Bullet, but that first horse was donated by my dad and Rusty's dad. Great. In order to continue the tradition of the Spirit Rider. They understood the magnitude of it. Now, I will tell you that, and this is in respect to Rusty, he's an attorney. He was very clear on what he was going to do. He made great grades. He was a pillar student. And Rusty understood the magnitude of what we were doing from the very first day. That didn't miss him. I look back and he had a lot to do with it succeeding because he and Dr. Finley were both concerned about my being a knucklehead and being in the wrong place at the wrong time and getting bad press. And I know Dr. Finley and Rusty talked about that, and I know Rusty kept pretty close tabs on where I was going and what I was doing. And I, thank you, Rusty, for taking that kind of role in my life. He's
and Rusty was from Rush Springs?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about Brad and Kenny. Where did they grow up and live about their
They grew up in a little town down close to Lawton called Surreal. Okay. I still see Kenny all the time. My wife and I like to bird hunt, and I go down and bird hunt on all their property, and I'm still good friends with their dad. I see Brad occasionally, but I see Kenny 5 or 6 times a year and talk to Rusty on the phone. I introduced Rusty to his wife, and they're still married, and I talk to them. They're family. So
personalities of Brad and Kenny?
Brad and Kenny are very different. Kenny's a little more like me. He's a little more reckless and go, and he runs a lot of cattle and farms and still a cowboy. Both of them have raised a good family. Brad was a quiet, think it through, don't make a decision till you're sure it's the right one, very careful person. He and Rusty were the careful ones in our group, and Kenny and I would charge hell with a bucket of water. We were a little bit reckless.
Yeah. Back to your story about purchasing the first book, I think what the students had a
I don't know how all that went down. I don't know who coordinated getting the name. I know my dad and Raymond didn't name the horse.
And my understanding is the student, there's a student competition for naming, but my question I ask you, the horse was a quarter horse? It was
yes,
a
sir.
Mare?
Quarter horse gelding.
Gelding, Black?
Black was what we wanted because the first 4 of us had ridden a black horse. And you know, when the colors of the school are orange and black, you can't get an orange horse, so you pretty much need a black one if you're
Do
going.
you remember what your parents paid for the horse?
I never was involved in that. I don't know. I know that they were concerned about getting a safe horse. And certainly they weren't going to go spend what it took to get a horse that had been rodeoed on a bunch.
John, you again graduated in 86.
December of 86.
At least left in 86 with the one course we were talking about in
Right.
December of 86. What can you review a little bit after following you left OSU, your professional career and your personal life a little bit from that point up to today?
I can. I was fortunate. I had interviewed. Again, you know, I grew up different than those guys did, and I lived different than they did, and I just always assumed that my life would be just fine. And Rusty and Kenny and Brad were concerned about what they were going to do for a living and how they were going to make that work. And the weight of that didn't hit me till I was about to graduate, and the companies are coming and interviewing. And I mean, you once again, you know, it was real simple for me. I was going to not go to college till my dad said, "You're going somewhere," so I went to college. And I didn't do any planning on what I was going to do after that till the weight of it hit me. And I got to have somewhere to go because I'm fixing to be through here. So I interviewed with several people, had some interest in an outfit called National Finance of Texas. And they, you know, I had worked in the feed yard. There was a small feed yard north of Stillwater that belonged to a guy named Bill Price. And I had gone to work for him and would ride Della and several young horses working cattle during the week and worked at the sale barn on the weekend. And so between a degree in economics and the ability to guess pretty close to what cattle weighed, they were a company that financed cattle. And they needed somebody that could grade cattle and could sit in an office and do spreadsheets and prepare documents so that loans on the value of cattle would be accurate in terms of what the cattle were worth. And I had interviewed with them. They weren't hiring. And I don't know why companies come to school when they're not hiring, or at least I didn't then, but I know now if they meet the right guy, they would hire him. So I went through several of the interviews and was appalled. There was absolutely nothing that I wanted to do. And then I met with these guys, and it was going to be an office job several days a week and grading cattle several days a week, and they granted me a second interview. And there was a gentleman named Bruce Hill who had been managing a big horse outfit, very famous horse outfit in North Texas, the Phillips Ranch. They had Dash for Cash, he was the first sire to ever have $40 million in progeny earnings. It was a big opportunity, and I knew, you know, I had fit sale horses and worked at the horse farms that my dad worked at, so I was very well aware of the Phillips Ranch. And Bruce Hill had left the Phillips Ranch and gone to work for D. Wayne Lucas, and D. Wayne Lucas was a very famous thoroughbred trainer, and he had moved to Norman. In fact, he had moved to the farm that I manage now. And Bruce had gone to work for him. And as luck would have it, I had gone to talk to my dad at work, and he happened to be at that farm doing vet work. And I met Bruce, and I told him that I was fixing to get out of school and I was looking for a job, and I was on my way to that second interview. I mean, I'd already set up my second interview with National Finance of Texas. And Bruce said, "Well, I just left the Phillips Ranch and they need an assistant manager. You should go interview for it." So I said, "Well, how do I get to do that?" And he said, "Well, do you want to interview for it?" And I said, "Well, of course I do." So he said, "Let me make a phone call." Well, the vet at the Phillips Ranch had been a vet school classmate of my dad's. And B.F. Phillips he was since divorced, but he had been married to the lady that owned the 4-6s, and my dad had worked at the 4-6s. And I had worked all those horse sales. So a phone call was made. They were through interviewing, but yes, they'd interview one more, especially since he had grown up in the horse business. So I called National Finance of Texas and said, "I'm going to come interview with you guys. I'm going to go to North Texas and interview both places." Well, I drove up at the Phillips Ranch, you know, and the driveway's 1.5 miles long, and there's horses up both sides. And I interviewed with Dr. Rudisill, who was my dad's classmate, and Brooks Thompson, who was the manager at the time, and I was to be his assistant. And I had no idea if they'd hire me or not, but I called and canceled the second interview with National Finance of Texas because I was going to figure out a way to work at the Phillips Ranch if I had to be the janitor. I had one trip up that driveway, and I was on. And I went back to Stillwater and finished my finals, and they called me, and this is fun too. the Four Sixes has a tremendous history. Burke Burnett founded the Four Sixes. That's why there's Burke Burnett, Texas. He had one son, Tom Burnett. Tom had a daughter named Ann. She had a daughter named Ann, and she has a daughter named Wendy. Well, the second daughter was called Little Ann, and Little Ann had been married to BF, and Dad had been the vet at the Sixes. And Mr. Phillips, I learned to love him. He was very dry, very matter of fact, a tremendous horseman. Had success with halter horses, roping horses, race horses. I mean, he was the real deal. He was a horseman. He was wealthy, but he knew how to make money, and he was a horseman. And a horse farm works when the top dog's a horseman. Anyway, Brooks called me and said, "Hey, you need to come down here and interview with Mr. Phillips." And I was nervous, but I'd spent probably 2 hours in the interview with Dr. Russell and Brooks. So I drive all the way to North Texas the week of finals, all nervous about introducing myself to BF and the interview. And of course, Dr. Russell was there and Brooks Thompson was there. And we go in Mr. Phillips' office, and it's a beautiful office at the ranch. And it's got this big mountain lion that he shot. And I knew who he was. And of course, he didn't know who I was, but I shake his hand, and he sits down, and he chit-chats a little, "How's your mom? How's your dad?" And then he says, "Dr. Russell and Brooks tell me you're the guy I need to hire." And I said, "Well, that's good." He said, "Well, I'm going to tell you, son, your dad used to work for my ex-wife. Don't ever bring it up. I'll see you Monday." And that was the end of the interview. and I'd gone down there wondering all the questions he was going to ask me and what all I was going to do. And I was in his office, 7 minutes. He had already made up his mind to hire me. He just wanted to shake my hand and hire me himself. And so I drove back to school and took my other 2 finals. And true to my rodeo heritage, and this is embarrassing too, because they had a 3-bedroom house for me right in front of the office, right in the center of the ranch. And they provided a truck for me that said Phillips Ranch on the side and had a phone in it. I thought I had made it. I thought I was a star, But I drove down there. I told them when I'd be there. I went back and took finals. They needed me to come go to work. They needed more help. And so I went back and took my last 2 finals and piled everything in the truck. And at the time, I had a single cab Chevy Custom Deluxe truck, which is, it had an AM radio and a vinyl seat.
And a heater.
No air conditioner. Yeah, it had, you roll the window down. And I had a 2-horse trailer, and I had Della and Linda in the trailer. And I drive up there, and they've got 5 or 6 people to help me move in. And they said, "When's your stuff going to get here?" And I said, "Well, this is it, boys. This is all I got, I didn't have any furniture. I've been living in school, and we didn't have, I had, a camper on my pickup, 10 or 12 changes of clothes and a little TV. And I had a little old recliner. Daddy gave me the recliner he was sick of, and my 2 horses in the trailer and all my saddles and hooker, and that's everything I owned, Everybody, there was enough people that when they carried everything in, 2 people didn't get to carry anything. They had me moved in before I got the truck shut off.
That's great.
That 3-bedroom house. Anyway, after I'd been there about a week, Mr. Phillips comes, and it was his house. And they made it clear that periodically they're going to come make sure you're taking care of the house. Well, he comes in the house, and the corner's got this big, beautiful cabinet like people used to have for their TV. And we didn't have VCRs. I don't know what we had then, but I got this little black and white TV sitting in that big old console, and my 1 chair in the living room, and that's it. My bed. That's all the furniture that's in the whole house, and the bed, was a box spring as a mattress sitting on a steel frame. And Mr. Phillips said, "Son, don't you have any furniture?" And I said, "Well, sure, it's here." I was happy. My saddles were in the guest bedroom, and so he called me to his office the next day, and he said, "Hey, there's a house up there on the Pam and Walt Garrison's old house was up on the ranch, and they didn't live there anymore." And he said, "It's full of furniture. I want you to go up there with Jane," that was his wife, "and pick you out some furniture. And if you would, son, put your tack in the tack room instead of in your house." And so I went and picked out some furniture and put it in the house and put my tack in the tack room and started living like a civilized human being, But I worked there till after Mr. Phillips died, and it was the most amazing experience of my life. He had 120 employees, and we housed them all. We stood 21 stallions. We had 500 stalls. And he made it clear to me the day I got there, "I don't want you to do anything but horses." And I didn't change the oil in my pickup. I didn't mow my yard. I didn't carry out my trash. I got up every morning and I did horses. During the fall, when I was getting on colts in the round pen, he didn't let me walk out of that round pen. He had people bringing me horses and putting them up. I'd stand in the round pen all day long and get on horses. I'd get on up to as many as 40 colts a day. I rode horses all over the ranch. We weaned, we kept, and I don't remember exact numbers, but we foaled 1,000 mares a year. And that means birthing them out. And that would be from January till about June. I kept a radio next to my bed. I got up with every single foal out, sometimes 7 a night. I worked 18 hours a day. I married a girl I'd met at Oklahoma State. But I was married to my job. She just got to live there. It wasn't fair to her. We have 2 wonderful boys. But at one point, and this ranch was 4,000 acres. You need to understand it was a huge ranch. Paved driveway, cattle guards, trees all the way up the driveway, 25 guys on the landscape crew, 2 big greenhouses, flowers everywhere. It was the show place of Texas. And Brooks was a tremendous manager. He spoke Spanish. I speak Spanish. A bunch of our crew was Hispanic. It was the biggest tax base in Denton County. Mr. Phillips was office there, but Mr. Phillips was a cowboy first, and he wanted a cowboy on that ranch. And Brooks was a good office manager and a good horseman, but not a cowboy. Mr. Phillips took me down in the corner, and there was a whole bunch of geldings, and he said, I want all these geldings. These are horses that didn't run. They raced them, but they didn't win. And he wanted them made into ranch horses. And Mr. Phillips and I became very close. I avoided him. My mom explained to me that he didn't hire me to be his friend. He hired me to work. And she told me before I left, I still remember it, she gave me a big hug and said, you'll do good, son. Stay away from management and do your job. And she was right on. I remember being in the office one morning with Brooks, and Mr. Phillips came in and pointed at both of us, and we were on the phone, landline, the old punch the button. Hung my phone up, and he hung his up, and Mr. Phillips said, if you're both in the same room, I don't need both of you. And he never caught me in the office again. I did my office work early in the morning or late at night, and I stayed horseback, and I loved it. I loved it. I rode everywhere. But Mr. Phillips, he was a neat guy and a fun guy, but he loved to give a horse away in the right situation, and I'd go pick out a pretty gelding and ride it, and Mr. Phillips would give it to somebody. And there was a gray horse down there in the pasture, and I asked him about him one day. Very seldom, but Mr. Phillips would gather me up. He had bought a bunch of mares from the Mullendore Ranch that weren't halter broke and asked me to get them halter broke. And he'd sit down there in the Jeep and watch me rope those big old rank mares and get halters on them by myself. And one of the nicest compliments I ever had is he told my dad at Ruidoso, he said, that boy's a cowboy. But I picked out a gray gelding that he hated. And this gelding would buck, he would bite you, he was awful. And I rode him a bunch. And one day Mr. Phillips asked me why I rode him, and I said, because you won't give him away. Because it was difficult to do my job on a green horse, and I'd get one finished and he'd give it to somebody. So I kept that awful gray horse going because I knew he wouldn't give him to anybody because he hated him. And when Mr. Phillips died, he had left documents in there that I could have that gray horse, and I left him at the ranch because I didn't like him either, when I left there. But I worked there for 6 years, and we sold all the best horses. We'd go to Ruidoso, which is one of the major quarter horse venues, and the top 20 horses in the sale, we'd take 10 of them. Heritage Place in Oklahoma City, we'd top those sales. It was a phenomenal experience for me.
So 6 years, so what year then did you leave there?
I lose track of years. I don't know that answer. Mr. Phillips died, and I wanted to be in business for myself. I was going to tell you about being unfair to my first wife, though. And we stayed married 13 years. God love her. I don't know how she put up with me that long because all I did was work. But we decided to go to dinner with friends, and we went out the front gate, and there were fountains. There were 2 little ponds on each side of the front gate, and there were fountains in them. And I commented on how pretty those fountains were. And it made her mad, and I didn't understand that. But she let me know the next day why it made her mad. Those fountains had been there 47 days. I hadn't been across the cattle guard in 47 days. I hadn't taken her to dinner. I hadn't gone to the store. I hadn't been off the ranch. I was happy to just do horses all day, every day. But after Mr. Phillips died, I started a business in North Texas. Joe Turner was a friend of Mr. Phillips, and he helped me get set up and use his place, and I broke colts and fit sale horses and started training on my own. And I was there 6 years and met a man named Jay Scaramucci who had gotten involved in the horse business and had bought the place that Dwayne Lucas had been using, and that I interviewed, that I met Bruce Hill on. That it all loops all the way back around. Bruce Hill was managing it for Dwayne Lucas. Jay Scaramucci bought it and asked me to hired me to manage it. So that was the second place I had followed Bruce Hill. I had taken the assistant manager spot. Bruce had been the manager at the Phillips Ranch, but when he left, Brooks moved up to manager and I moved into assistant. So twice I got to follow Bruce in a spot that he had left open for me, which I appreciate very much. And I've been here 15 years. I've worked for the Scaramucci family 15 years.
You said you worked 6 years at the other place, and then you've been 15 years here.
Yes, sir. And when I worked at the other place, I broke lots of colts for other quarter horse trainers. I had never worked for a racehorse trainer nor trained racehorses. Mr. Scaramucci convinced me that I could train racehorses, and I had a lot of foundation for it. And my dad was close friends with Jack Brooks, who's a legend as a quarter horse trainer. So I had quite a bit of foundation there that I could go to. And I started training for Mr. Scaramucci, and I think our third year we were leading owner at Remington Park in the quarter horse meet, and we held that title 8 years in a row and never gave it up, and won it with homebreds. And
great.
it was a tremendous run. It was.
You worked how long there? How many years did you work with him?
Mr. Scaramucci, mm-hmm. I'm still working for him.
See, that's still so.
Yes, sir. And I've been with him 15 years.
Oh my gosh.
And
what kind of your responsibilities here? We're here, south between Norman and Moore.
When I hired on for Mr. Scaramucci, he hired me as his horse farm manager, and he had some frustrations with the whole concept of public trainers, and he wanted his own trainer. But I hired on as a horse farm manager, and then I began getting his horses ready to run and putting them with other trainers. And then he and I collectively made the decision that it was time for me to be his trainer. And the first year I was his trainer, we were leading owner, and we did it 8 years in a row. And we did it together. He comes to the farm, and we worked with horses. And a lot of the dynamics of horse racing in Oklahoma have changed. His kids were young, and mine were too. And they didn't have lights at Remington Park. And when the racing started at 1 o'clock on the weekends, he'd take his kids and all their friends, and I'd take my kids and all my kids' friends, and we'd win races every weekend, and the kids had a ball, and it was just a fun way to raise kids. And since that time, they've got casino gambling at the tracks, which is phenomenal for horse racing. But we were playing double-A ball, if you will, and we were really good at it. And Remington Park's Yankee Stadium now. And we would have to do a tremendous upgrade in the quality of horses that we have to compete at the level that Remington is now. We still play some, but in addition to that, his kids are grown and my kids are almost grown, and they run at night now. And the night racing is very difficult for a regular work schedule. When we run now, we get home at midnight or 1 o'clock, and we still have to start at 6 the next morning. So we've kind of graduated away from that. We still run some horses. Mr. Scaramucci owns quite a bit of property, and he's moved me into his property management position. And there's a lot of real estate management down here, so he's continued to keep me employed and keep me busy.
Looks like you may be here for a while then.
Well, he tells me I will be, and I'd like that. He's a fine man to work for.
John, thanks for being there. I just want to could I ask you a couple of reflective kinds of questions?
Yes, sir.
I know you said you haven't come back and watched the program, but I'm sure from a distance you kind of followed it, the Spirit Rider program at OSU. Are you pleased with, when you start off, this is sort of, we talked about being kind of a trial, and you're not exactly sure that it'd catch on or what, and then you realize the season went on that it would, and of course since it's grown even bigger and bigger. Do you like the way it's progressed and developed? I mean, is that...
Oh, I do. I absolutely do. And I'm thrilled. Larry Powers, Dr. Powers, is a guy that I've known as an equine surgeon since I was in high school. He's a very, very successful man. His daughter is, and he's done a lot of work for us. He's done all my surgeries for Willow Ridge horses. He's a fine man and a good surgeon. Tom Carroll's brother, Brian Carroll, is in partnership with Dr. Powers. Dr. Powers' daughter is the same age as my oldest son, Stephen. Dr. Powers, when he would come to Willow Ridge to do stuff for me, Sarah would pile out of the truck and play in the backyard with my kids. Mm-hmm. She's at Oklahoma State now and has applied to be the Spirit Rider. So it's such a tradition, and it's such a blessing that through Dr. Finley's vision, we've been able to tie the College of Agriculture to the football program. The foundation of Oklahoma is agriculture. Oklahoma loves its football. Oklahoma State's just had a good football year, and the Spirit Rider is the tie to the land run, to the land grant institution, and the joy of football season and winning. And you know, the football season brings colleges in Oklahoma more publicity than anything they do. You can be third in the nation in football and get more publicity than if you're first in the nation in wrestling. That's not fair, but that's just how it is. And so for that Spirit Rider program to have tied to the publicity of football and the history of Oklahoma, that's a really neat deal.
Final question. OSU Spirit Rider and Bullet have become OSU traditions, as we talked about. What does it mean to you to have been the first Spirit Rider and to have represented your university in that role?
It's unbelievable. First of all, I have tremendous pride. Second of all, I'm humbled that Dr. Finley and Rusty and Brad and Kenny had sense enough to keep it all in check and make it work. I have a lot of appreciation for those guys. But there's never, you know, for those of us in the workforce, a lot of times what you do is more than just your job, it's who you are. And since I was a little kid, I'm a horseman. I've made my living as a horseman. To look back and to have been part of a horse program at Oklahoma State that's very successful, for the way people to remember me as sitting on a horse, and that's from the time I was in high school. All my high school classmates remember me on a horse. All my college classmates remember me on a horse. I'm still sitting on a horse. It's phenomenal. And to have got to be an instrument, and make no mistake about it, I was not the reason that succeeded. I was blessed that I had rodeoed, that I had had a good horse, that there was a picture of me in the paper. But I was nothing more than an instrument of that thing taking off and going. And I guess the main thing that we got done is that we didn't mess it up. And now if there was a mistake, it would still continue as a tradition. And I've never been anywhere in any kind of introduction. I mean, when Joe Turner, who I told you helped me start my own business, his family asked me to accept his dedication into the American Quarter Horse Hall of Fame. And I went to Portland, I went to, I'm blank right now, Seattle. I went to Seattle and accepted that for him. Everywhere I go, I introduce myself as John Beall Jr. And somebody else says, oh, by the way, he was the first Spirit Rider. It has followed me through my whole career. You don't have to tell people that. All these years later, you know, Sarah calls me and wants me to know that she wants to be the Spirit Rider. It's so much bigger than I am. It's bigger than my career. It's a banner that people fly for me. I don't ever have to tell people I was the first Spirit Rider. They know it's really been fun.
John, is there anything we left out that you'd want to mention or say about Spirit Rider program or your participation?
Nothing more than I'd give anything. I'd give anything if I could tell you the Dean of Agriculture's name when I was there, but I do want to give him the respect that he deserves for putting me on academic probation, for the core. I mean, I train horses for a living, but horses come and horses go. And the group of people that dedicate themselves to helping young people become what they dream of being. For the people that surrounded me, and I mean Rusty and Brad and Kenny, and especially Dr. Finley and Dr. Topliff and the dean, who took an interest in don't let this kid get away, and have helped me accomplish my dreams. For my kids to be so proud of me being the first Spirit Rider, I just am grateful for a university that is recruiting young people and then not letting them go and trying to help people reach their dreams. It's a special group of people that give themselves to young people.